Okay, so I chose to do my research topic on sweatshops. A sweatshop is a grueling workplace with long hours, low pay, poor working conditions, and they also have little regards for the workers' health, their safety, and also their wages for their families. Sweatshops exist because companies want to make more money. Big companies have sweatshops because they can give their workers low wage and they can earn a lot of profit off of them. They also don't have to worry about providing medical or life insurance for their workers. And child labor can also be implemented into workshops. The workers in sweatshops may deal with hazardous substances or poor working conditions where it affects their health. They may be subject to abuse in these conditions with no way to defend themselves. Also, the workplaces that they could potentially work in have no heat or air, depending on the season. They're where they work, the buildings aren't clean. They could be infected or infested with anything. They work very long, sleepless, and tiring hours, and they also may not get any time for breaks or bathroom breaks. In the 1800s, when the immigrants and their families began arriving, they were needing money and work to get their start in this new land, and those participating in slavery soon began to realize that they needed to clothe and feed their families, and they needed to clothe and feed those who were now on their land. With little other work available and job options available to them, they often had to accept what the employer offered to pay them, and they also had little to no say when they were docked pay or refused for what the employer could call defective garments that they made. The workers barely made enough money to cover their basic needs for their families, and they oftentimes relied on charity or their family and friends to supply their basic needs. Women often made anywhere between 25 and 50% less pay than men who performed the same jobs as them. They had no real social power or other opportunities for income, so they had to do what they had to do those jobs because they really didn't have any other options, and they had no say, so they just had to keep continuing to do that to make money. And this group of Americans, they also fell into a similar situation as that of slavery. After seeing how many sweatshop workers had to turn to charity to get their basic needs covered, the church and social reformers began to step in and speak out for those workers who were unable to do for themselves. With many immigrants being from countries with strong Catholic fractions, the laborer and the church forged a natural union and became the heart and soul of the labor movement over time. The Civil War was thought to possibly lead to better paying conditions for the sweatshop workers because of the demand for tailored uniforms that would further the network of sewing factories needed for seamstresses. But the industry continued to fall behind. They continued to lag, and the workers continued to work for marginal pay, and also their bosses gathered the rewards for the growing demand in production and took that to themselves and didn't help out their workers in any way. So, the early 19th century and the abolitionist movement that sought to end slavery, it contained an equal amount of disgust with the sweatshops, just as the Civil War did. Many abolitionists saw direct similarities between the slave industry and the garment sweatshop industry. As with slavery, those working under these conditions didn't necessarily choose their circumstances. It was life forced it on them without a way for them to stand for equality. The first significant law to address sweatshops was the Factory Act of 1833, and this law made owning slaves illegal in the United Kingdom. The Factory of 1883 and the law that made the United Kingdom, they were both passed in 1883. Slavery was outlawed in the U.S. in 1865, but groups continued to discuss and define what constituted poor working conditions and fair-waged people. Starting in 1891, I believe, the Catholic Church with Pope Leo VIII and the Rerum Novarum, it has issued 6 documents throughout history that specifically speaks for the right of workers and their right to organize in labor unions or take responsible social action to prevent abuse and cruelty to marginalized workers. Since the Rerum Novarum was published in 1891, 5 more documents have been written to express the clear, consistent, and explicit rights of workers. The Rerum Novarum, it also addressed the alarming situation that the industrial movement was promoting, where the indigent worker was being made an instrument for money, and their basic human rights and needs were ignored. Despite the efforts of the church and social reformers, sweatshops have remained a part of the global economy and still continue today. Thank you.